Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to PsychoBible, battling about psychology and theology. So this is part two of my webinar series, or webinar that I did with strong support. Now, as I stated in part one, I'm splitting up this webinar into different parts. This is actually a segment from an addendum video that I did after the webinar in order to finish the slides that I didn't get to. So that's why it'll look a bit different. Now, just a note, Strong Support is an organization or ministry for Muslims that deal with unwanted same-sex attraction or same-sex lust, as they'll say. But that said, this video is actually a really good resource for anyone who's interested in the topic of therapy or counseling options for people with unwanted same-sex attractions, arousal, behavior, um, compulsions, lust, however you want to describe it. So, if you're curious about the different therapeutic approaches, if all you've ever heard of was reparative therapy or straw man's like conversion therapy, then last video and this video is really for you. It's not just for Muslims or even just for Christians who are interested in this topic. So, that said, let's begin. Okay, the next major approach is Richard Cohen's four-stage model. He didn't really have as far as I know, a name for this model, but he broke it down into four stages, and they build upon each other. So with each stage, there will be certain behaviors or tasks, and you need to continue doing those as you go through the next stage. So you don't just do one thing for a little while, then you do another thing. It just adds to itself. So the first stage he called transitioning. And with that stage, the main approach the therapist will take is behavioral. The goal of this stage is it's about transitioning in behavior and methods of coping with the same-sex attraction to disengage from and participating in homosexual pornography or actions with other people, relationships, and begin the separation process of separating yourself from the behavior associated with homosexuality. So it's going to require a lot of behavioral work and sort of treating it like an addiction in some ways. You're going to start with cutting off sexual behavior like porn, masturbation, acting out, one-night stands, dating apps, hookup apps, things like that. Develop a support system, an accountability system. Have people that you go to for accountability, that you share your struggle with, who will be there to encourage you in your next goals. They won't condemn you. You don't want someone as an accountability partner who's going to shame you or condemn you when you confess things. You want someone who's going to hear you, agree with your values, agree, yeah, that was wrong, but then point out, hey, there's hope. We can learn from this. You're forgiven. And let's keep moving forward. They're going to encourage progress, not condemn you, not put you down, not tell you you're despicable and shameful. If you have someone in your life like that, that's not the person you want to be going to with your issues. So you want people who are going to uplift you, but at the same time aren't going to encourage you to embrace this behavior that you're trying to change. So also, that's the next within this stage is beginning work on self-esteem and mending your relationship with God. So there will be a lot of emphasis on positive thinking and recognizing cognitive distortions, like just illogical thought patterns and ways of viewing the world and viewing yourself. So catching those things, replacing them with more realistic and healthy thoughts, adjusting your standards for yourself. If you have really high standards, but your evaluation of yourself is here, that gap is going to be that thorn in your side, that thing that's going to keep you from growing in your self-worth and self-esteem. So as we make, raise your self-evaluation and lower that any unrealistic expectations you have that are just too lofty, make them more realistic, and then strive to do better in certain traits or behaviors, skills, so that you can decrease that gap. But also having a firm foundation. That's where the support system is so important in building up that self-esteem, that idea that even with my issues, whatever they may be, I'm not just talking about homosexuality here, but whatever things about yourself that you're ashamed of, having people that will accept you just as you are and just provide camaraderie and approval and want to be with you, give you that sense of belonging. From there, we have a foundation for developing self-worth, because we're not meant to be alone. We're social creatures. So our sense of honor comes from acceptance from a community. Okay, so, and who knows how long someone may be in this stage of transitioning. I've worked with guys who would not kick the porn habit, and so they're still stuck in that stage. They refuse to open up to people, to take that chance. I'm talking about guys with either same-sex attractions or with just regular heterosexual sexual addictions. So they sort of are stuck in that stage for quite a while. It's a risk because we've been relying on the pornography and the masturbation as our self-medication. Well, we need to be willing to cut that off, remove those exit plans, so that we can really see where God is going to come in and provide help for us. And that means also taking steps. So it overlaps with the next stage, which is grounding. And there's going to be more cognitive therapy. And the goal there is to increase assertiveness and communication skills. Because as you're finding that you're stepping away from the old behaviors you used to use to cope with your problems, you might find that, oh, that means I can't rely on my old resources. I need help from other people. But if you've been so scared to reach out to others for help and to state very directly and clearly what you would like, as in like how you would like someone to help you, like I need a hug right now. I need to talk. I just want to voice my concerns. I need someone just to tell me I'm loved. And if you've been so scared to do that for the longest time, then this next stage is going to be key. Developing assertiveness and communication skills, problem-solving skills. Like if we default to sexual addiction when we're faced with a difficulty, we're not developing any problem-solving skills. So we need to begin, all right, let's learn new ways of coping, new ways of addressing difficulties in our lives. And then also there's going to be a deeper work of inner healing. That starts in this stage. So as we do this, we recognize some of our wounds, the ways that, well, of course I don't have any problem-solving skills. My parents didn't teach me anything. And so there's a wound that's been identified. And so there's going to be some grieving that begins in this stage. It's not going to be the main focus, but it's going to begin as we become aware. It's a cognitive stage, so we're becoming more aware of our shortcomings, our wounds that we've been covering up with our sexual lust and behavior and addiction even. So the next stage is healing the homo-emotional wounds. So now we've been identifying wounds. We're going to discover root causes. So the next two stages are doing a lot of psychodynamic work. Now that we've stabilized behaviorally, and we've identified new coping behaviors, new coping skills, new ways of meeting our needs in the present, now we have a foundation. We have some security so that now we can sort of do some diving into our deeper wounds. And what we'll need in this stage are people who, this is why you have to have a support system. You need to have peers who are there with you. You need to have mentors or a mentor, a counselor if you can find one. But if you at least have good friends and mentors, people who care for you, who have wisdom, but also don't have a vested interest in what happens one way or the other with you. So not like a family member, because they're going to have ulterior motives sometimes. Not bad necessarily, but like if you're talking to your dad probably wants you to fix this issue. because it has something to do with himself as well. So you want someone who can be detached a bit. They're a bit indifferent, but they also are caring and they support you. They just don't have any skin in the game. So they can be with you and they walk with you through the grieving process. As you identify wounds, you grieve. And grieving means you begin to recognize how you were hurt. And you stop trying to make excuses for the person who hurt you or the events that hurt you. And one thing we see a lot is we start looking at our old wounds from the present. And now as we're adults, we look at our childhood wounds and we see now we have more information. Well, I know that's why my dad was like that because of the way he was raised. And that's good. That's helpful because that'll help us with the next step, which is forgiveness. But that doesn't help us with the grieving. We need to recognize, well, how did you feel back then? You didn't know all that stuff back then. As a little boy, you didn't have all that understanding. You didn't have that hindsight you have now. So let's go back and recognize how this affected you. The damage was still done in some way. So let's go back and let's allow ourselves to feel those feelings that we've been blocking for so long. As we do that, we allow ourselves to express those feelings in a healthy, safe environment, whether it's through crying, releasing anger, yelling, screaming. The grieving process, it looks different for so many people. But allow yourself to feel those feelings. And then you work through forgiving that person, releasing them from the debt of what they did. Now, this is where it can be difficult if you're still in a home where the persons that hurt you back then are still hurting you in the present. This is going to make things just incredibly difficult. So sometimes you just simply need to get out of that environment. Grieve, heal, then you can forgive, and then you can actually enter back into that relationship possibly, but under different conditions, under healthier conditions. The main thing here is that you're taking responsibility for yourself and your healing journey. And it's going to be crucial here to build healthy same-sex relationships, especially with guys who don't have same-sex attraction issues or lust issues. So guys that are trustworthy, who are dependable, who are safe. And some may know about your struggle, some may not. That's not a prerequisite for them to be healthy. But I would definitely encourage you that as you feel safer with them, you feel more a part of the group, that you share that with them. So you can see that as you're safe, that you can be more real and authentic. So you'll need those same-sex relationships. That's going to help heal from any of those wounds from our parents, our same-sex parent, and become a model to us, not just parent, but also a lot of times we've been hurt by siblings, for men, hurt by our brothers in different ways. And that has a lot to do with how we relate to peers and our potential lovers. So we want to realize that what we're really looking for a lot of time is connection. And so we want to get healthy connection with the same sex. And that brings us to, once we've made some progress in that area, then we can move into healing the HeteroEmotional wounds, wounds inflicted by the opposite sex. That could be our mothers, it could be a sister, it could be other figures of the opposite sex that we looked up to and admired, but then they shamed us in some way and made us feel like we can't measure up as a man enough to be worthy of a woman. So let's discover those root causes. Once again, grieve, forgive, take responsibility, and then build healthy opposite sex relationships. We want to get to this place where we so identify with our own sex. We've built such good relationships with our own gender that the opposite sex is the one that seems different and what we call exotic. There's actually a gay researcher who came with the idea exotic becomes erotic. Now there's some details of his theory here that we disagree with. You can look those up on Nicolosi's website, Joseph Nicolosi's website, Senior. But the idea is that it's out of recognition, usually on an unconscious level, that the opposite sex is different from you. That's where our attraction comes. But if we've grown up and we always related more to girls than we did our own sex, it's guys, it's our own sex that seems exotic to us. So then when puberty hits and we get that rush of hormones and testosterone that it sexualizes those feelings of being different. So it's now the gender that we feel different from that we are attracted to. Well, if you've always felt different from your own sex, then when puberty comes, it's your own sex that's going to become more attractive. And you've always probably felt drawn toward them or interested or mystified by them, but now what you'll find is that you're sexually attracted to them. And so that's why a lot of guys grow up thinking that they were born gay, because they've always felt different from their own sex or pulled toward them. That's why some people make the distinction between same-sex attraction and same-sex sexual attraction, because we are meant to be attracted to our own sex in a healthy, non-sexual way. The problem is when it becomes sexualized and we feel pulled or drawn or desire attention from the same sex. So we want to get to the point where we're more familiar with our own sex. Like, all right, I feel like I'm one of the guys now. Okay, I don't want to consume this guy. And really, that's the way you can refer to homosexuality as kind of cannibalistic. You want to consume them so you can integrate them into you. But once you fully are secure in your own manhood, you don't have a desire to do that any longer. It's now the opposite sex that is appealing. So we also want to build healthy opposite sex relationships so that there's a distinction. Now, I know with Islam, there's been historically, traditionally, there's been a very clear distinction between male and female. So I'm not sure how the dynamic is in Islam, but I know one of the dynamics I see in America among just non-Muslims is very much guys who spend so much time with girls, they almost become like one of the girls. And they don't see the distinction. They almost think that they can get away with talking about their private parts with girls and talking about intimate details with girls and letting girls talk to them about things that they should only be talking about with other girls, not with them as a guy. And so there's no boundary there. And we make it sort of like give these guys, the gay guy, the gay best friend, a pass. Like, oh, we treat him like a girl. No, there should be a distinction. There are male things, female things. There's male boundaries, female boundaries. And when we respect those, then we can start to develop that separation that leads to the attraction eventually. Now, if you're doing this work later in life, it's I'm not sure if it is always to be expected that you will eventually develop that attraction because to the opposite sex, because of how long have you been suppressing just sexual desire in general. So we can get to the point of being sexually apathetic, where we just have low sexual interest, and the only sexual interest that we maybe used to nurture was for the same sex. And so then when we start healing from that, it may be difficult to acquire the attraction to the opposite sex. So for some, progress may look like decreasing same-sex attraction, but it might not always lead to an increase in opposite-sex attraction. For so long, we've only measured the one dynamic, the one continuum of how much same-sex attraction someone has. And we failed to also measure how much opposite-sex attraction someone has. So researchers now are starting to realize, okay, we need to include that in our measurements. So we'll see, hopefully, more research will continue to happen so that we can really get a good figure of all that. Okay, like I was saying, there's other approaches other than Nicolosi's and Cohen's. They're probably most well known. I know a lot of guys who've done training with Nicolosi and others who've done training with Richard Cohen. So it's easy to think that they're the only ways you can deal with unwanted same-sex attraction. But what you'll find with the Alliance is any mainstream counseling approach can be used. And one of the most surprising to me is how narrative therapy can be used. Why is that? Because narrative therapy is one of the most modern, really it's a postmodern form of therapy. And so it's so, to me, associated with left-wing mentality and philosophy, with social construction and reconstruction philosophy that I would never think it could be used for this type of issue. But Carolyn Pila, one of the past presidents of the Alliance, she comes from a narrative therapy approach. Now, she does so with some modifications, because with narrative therapy, typically, like I said, is rooted in postmodern philosophy and relativism. So they don't believe in justifying any sort of grand narratives and that there's any absolute truths. Okay? Now, Carolyn, as a Christian, disagrees on that point. But there are aspects to narrative therapy that can be used in ways that most people on the left, the progressives, would not think. Now, with narrative therapy, there's a big focus on collaboration. So, whereas maybe reparative or reintegrative therapy will often, they'll use collaboration, of course. The client sets the goals, but especially with more traditional psychodynamic and psychoanalytic approaches, the therapist is viewed more as like the expert that's going to help train the client, or at least be the one who will be the most objective person, and that they want to build the transference there. Narrative therapy is more collaborative, I would say, and the therapist is even less directive. And their main goal is to support the client's autonomy. So one of the main objectives here is for the client to deconstruct stories and reclaim lost stories. So we're going to examine co-created discourses from family and culture and self as well. What that means, co-created discourses. So there's maybe statements that we just grow up hearing, like, born this way. Okay, that is a discourse. And when we own it, we take it upon ourselves, it becomes a co-created discourse. So we hear it in our culture, we believe it, it becomes a story. That people are born gay, cannot change. That becomes now a mantra in our society. And we hear it, we can grow up with, oh, I've always been this way. Things like that. On the other side, we could hear other things. It's a choice. People just choose to be gay, which really lacks the nuance it deserves. So that becomes a discourse we hear in particularly conservative cultures and families. And so we hear that and we like, well, I must be choosing these attractions. And so that builds our shame and our guilt. And those stories enforce our identity, the way we view ourselves and our worth. And what is narrated and rehearsed becomes powerful. So the more we hear something and the more we believe it and we think it in our mind, and then we rehearse it by acting on it, it becomes a story that really has a lot of power in our lives and a lot of control. What is not narrated is lost. So one of the goals is to deconstruct the stories and support the client's autonomy, their own self-determination in choosing the narratives, the stories that have been lost, the ones that they want and that fit their values and their goals. And one of the main techniques you'll use here is externalizing the problem outside the client's identity. So we want them to stop identifying with the problem. And so it might be, say she's working with a client with suicidal ideation. She had an example where they nicknamed the suicidal ideation SI, for SI. And so it became something external, it became anthropomorphized, so that the client could deal with it as an issue, as an experience. When it comes to same-sex attraction, Carolyn would say she calls it same-sex attraction experiences. She wants to help the clients separate themselves, their identity, from the issue itself. So that, like with you guys using the term same-sex lust, it's not who you are, it's something you experience and engage in. So that's a very helpful way of viewing it. That's what I really like that. So that's just a brief overview of narrative therapy approach. There's a really good video Carolyn did at the IFTCC conference explaining her approach, and of course it's only an hour long, so it's still limited, but she does a really good job in that hour explaining her approach. There's the cognitive behavioral approach. Now, there's probably a few ways you can use cognitive behavioral therapy, and the main idea here is that you're not focusing so much on the feelings, but you're focusing on the thoughts and actions. And if we can change thoughts and actions, then eventually the feelings will follow. So that's pretty typical cognitive behavioral or CBT mentality there. I'm going to give you sort of the overview of Michael Cox's approach. Michael Cox is a Mormon therapist in Salt Lake City, and so he presented his model at the Alliance Conference actually twice, so last year, 2019 and 2018. So the main idea here is that same-sex lust and behavior is viewed as a defense mechanism against awareness or feelings of pain. So there may be underlying feelings of pain, and we use the same-sex lust and behavior as a defense against those things. Now, he did not really take a stance necessarily on how these behaviors first originated or the attractions, how they originated. To him, ultimately, it might not be knowable, but his main point was, even if we can't fix the cause of the issue, we can address the defense. And if we view the same-sex behavior as a defense, then we can change that. It loses its potency. It loses its control and domination over our lives. So the focus will be on changing beliefs and values regarding that behavior. Remind ourselves, no, this is wrong. This is not something I want to continue to engage in. But also, this is, when we understand, this is me trying to meet an underlying need. So I'm not bad for having these needs and these longings, but I need to find healthier ways of meeting these longings. And we want to replace automatic negative thoughts, ants. So we got to replace those ants. So that as soon as we get a negative thought of our worth, our value, about others as well, we can step back and analyze that in a healthier way. And what we expect or hope to see is that a change in beliefs will form new behavior, which will increase positive feelings of happiness and love. And as we do that, we'll act on those emotions instead. And if we still feel some discomfort, we can see some value in that, because continual discomfort, even if it decreases, can still motivate us to continue changing, to continue choosing new behaviors. Instead of engaging in this pornography, I'm going to reach out to friends. I'm going to journal. I'm going to pray. I'm going to do some self-inventory. I'm going to do relaxation techniques. So I'm going to keep doing my grief work, keep processing my emotions from my wounds that I've identified. So just having some shame still or pain will be motivation. I still have work to do. Let me keep at it. And when I increase healthy connections with others. So like I said, the goal here of a CBT approach is addressing the defense, not necessarily fixing the cause of the problem. We can't go back in time. So let's work on, the behavior itself and the thoughts that reinforces those behaviors. And through doing that, we at least, even if the attractions continue, we've at least eliminated or reduced the impact on our lives. Now, some people might not be satisfied with this approach because it might not have totally eradicated the attractions, or it might not have necessarily increased the opposite sex attractions. So it all depends what your goals in therapy are and how much change you may be satisfied with. That's up to you to determine. So we can also use a family systems therapy approach. Christopher Doyle from the Institute for Healthy Families, he's been doing a lot of trainings at the Alliance conferences on his family systems approach. Now, there's a lot to it, so he'll use a variety of techniques. I'm not going to do his approach justice right now, but I'll just give you a few points about his approach that really stood out to me. And that is one that he would redefine the patient as the whole family union. A lot of times when we have, in particular, like a son with same-sex attraction, the parents bring the son in, whether he's a minor or an adult, and be like, he's got this issue, he's got this problem, fix him. Please help him work through his issue. And especially if you're coming from a developmental point of view, we would say, well, how did these issues happen? They didn't just come out of the blue. So how can we expect him to change if the system in which he lives, the family, doesn't change as well? So one thing, which may seem counterintuitive because we're all about not endorsing or accepting or validating the homosexual identity and behavior, but one of the things he'll do is encourage the family to reduce their rejection and increase emotional bonding and healing, whether or not the child changes. So the goal isn't to fix the child with same-sex lusts or behaviors, it's to love the child. And so one of the things he offers is retreats for parents, like one for dads, one for moms, and so that they heal from their own wounds, from their own childhoods, and then that they learn how to love their children well. Because really, what is the underlying need? Is usually going to have something to do with your parental relationship, so might as well help parents love properly. And to do that means to love without an agenda. Not love so that, well, I can fix you, I can get rid of this issue, so that you'll be normal again. So you won't be a freak, you won't be gay. Like, that's not really love then. The idea is that you love so much that you'll do whatever healing it takes so that the underlying emotional wounds are healed. So it's important, parents, for you to do your own healing. So this might be an encouragement for you if you have a child with same-sex attraction and or homosexual behavior and they're not willing to work for you. The one thing you can do is do your own healing. Even if it's on your own and you're not it's still in a relationship with your child, do your own healing. The healthier you get, the healthier interactions will be when you finally do reconnect with your children. And as they start noticing those changes and you show that you are healing and you're healthier, you'll be viewed as someone safer. Eventually, they'll test it. They'll test it for a while. They won't believe it. So they'll probably fight against you and try to get you to act out and to rage out or to go back to your old patterns, whatever they were. So if you can hold off on that and you can just show that you can handle it, eventually they'll be opening up to you. That's a hope, I guess, we could have. But that is simply what you can do on your end. Is not try to put pressure on your child to change, but look within yourself. How might have you contributed? Not necessarily to their same-sex attraction, but just to their own woundedness in other ways, which probably all interrelates. It all overlaps, and we're a whole. Everything matters. And that brings us to our experiential approaches, such as psychodrama, which is often used in the family systems approaches. But also Mike Davidson from the Core Issues Trust in the UK, he uses psychodrama. And so you do, usually in a group setting, you'll have the members of the group will do activities together, and usually there'll be a person in the group who they'll be like the patient of the day, and they'll describe a scenario that they grew up with perhaps, and the group members will reenact that childhood dynamic and that childhood memory. And it becomes like a way to access emotions that were buried. You may also use Gestalt techniques like an empty chair, where you have a chair that the patient looks at and imagines whoever abused them, whoever failed them in some way, and shares with them what they think, how they feel. They have an imaginary conversation with that person, or monologue, that is talk. And so that can be healing. It can be a way to release emotions. Support groups are so important. I usually say that the best approach is to do individual counseling to go deeper with issues and have that support group so that you can build up that sense of being part of your gender, being part of one of the guys, that you really belong. And so it's so important to have both. even if that support group isn't necessarily for same-sex attraction, but it's just a safe group where you feel like you belong there. But the more open you can be about yourself and your struggles, and others can be as well, the better that group will be. And it can be a peer-led group, or it could be a therapy group. It could be closed, or it could be open. The better groups would be the ones that are more closed, not open, where people can come and go. You want a group that's safe. You could do retreats for helping to heal masculine wounds, like Journey into Manhood. I've heard mixed things, but a lot of it's been just stuff that's distorted in the media. So the friends I have who've actually gone always tell me it was a powerful experience. And they also have a follow-up group they can do. So that's just an overview of the different approaches that can be used in addressing unwanted same-sex attraction and lust and behavior. They're, like I said, that's just a sample. So any mainstream approach can be used. The main things you want to look for are having a solid and growing therapeutic alliance, because you may have started off with some rapport, but maybe as you start doing some deeper work, some feelings will come up, and you might transfer those feelings, say issues with your parents, you may transfer them, project them onto the therapist, and now you'll feel detached, you'll feel scared to be honest and open with that therapist. So we want to realize that we need to continually be nurturing that therapeutic relationship so it stays healthy, it stays honest, you stay well connected. It's going to go through changes. It's not going to stay the same. So it's going to resemble a real life relationship, but it's kind of contrived at the same time because it's a professional relationship, it's a contracted relationship. So it's not going to be the same thing as a friendship or a parental relationship. So you want a good therapeutic alliance, and you want a therapist who's going to respect, honor, and encourage your independence, your autonomy, your self-determination. All right, I had some other slides on here as well, but this was the most I wanted to go over at the webinar. I know Ali sent you guys the rest. So the rest is pretty much self-explanatory. It goes into the developmental model for the most part, and sort of my way of explaining the two main pathways to same-sex attraction. And I have a link in the PowerPoint to a video of Joseph Nicolosi going over shame versus assertion self-states, and a critique of the APA and their opposition of the work we do. And then some studies that show positive outcomes. Now, bear in mind, positive outcomes, if we see change, it's on a continuum, and there's different continuums. One continuum may be for change in the same-sex attraction. Another may be change in our opposite sex attraction, change in our behavior, change in our relationships, change in our emotional well-being and addictions. So we want to make sure people are healthy, so that we're not self-harming in other ways or being depressed, abusing drugs and alcohol. So that's an important measure as well. Okay.